Hey, today I'll be talking about Book 7 of Legend of Zhenhuan. Ling Rong is dead. Zhenhuan tells Li Chang not to tell anyone that her brother was the last person who met her, as she gets him ready to go and see the emperor for the first time since his exile. He's apprehensive. After all, the death of his wife and son, not to mention the whole fall of the Zhen family, were all thanks to this man. Zhenheng is worried that he won't be able to maintain the facade, that their relationship remains unchanged, and boy oh boy does Zhenhuan know how that feels. She tells him, "Accompanying a royal is like living with a tiger. Their love is fickle. You will not always be favored, nor will you always be out of favor. It all depends on if you still have value. As long as you understand this, brother, you will not place any importance on whether or not there is any sincerity in it." My brother stared at me for a moment and said with pity, "Huan, you seem to be talking about yourself." They go and meet him, and Shenling is as cordial as ever, even calling him by the title of older brother-in-law despite being 6 years older than him. Things are going well until Shenling brings up Zhenheng getting remarried. Zhenheng freezes and doesn't know how to respond. Of course, he has no interest in a new wife, having just barely recovered from the trauma of losing his family, again, thanks to this man. But as he and Zhenhuan understand, not wanting to remarry kind of sends a message that he hasn't completely forgiven the emperor, that he still holds some kind of grudge. I mean, not really, but the emperor could see it that way. Zhenhuan deflects that he has so many nieces and nephews now that he's got his hands full, and the emperor agrees to leave it at that for now. Now Li Chang comes in and reports that Ling Rong is dead, and Zhenhuan is all, "Oh my gosh, what? When did that happen?" The emperor is so dismissive of his dead former favorite concubine that it almost makes sense that he's telling Zhenheng to just get over it and remarry. He's done the same countless times. And that's pretty much it. So long, Ling Rong. The harem goes back to its normal issues. Zhen, the second prince's mother, is still having trouble with her former maid, who is now Rong Pian, imperial concubine. Zhen still outranks her, but she's a favorite and rude as hell. One day, Zhenhuan runs into a crying imperial concubine, Ying. Thinking she's homesick, Zhenhuan wants to invite her family to enter the palace, but Ying admits she has no parents or family. She says she was crying over jealousy that the emperor had picked her roommate to spend the night with instead of her. Jealousy is a most grievous sin for a concubine, but Zhenhuan smiles lightly that it's natural, though she should monitor her emotions better in public. Ying is very grateful and rushes off. And Jinxi wonders what she was actually crying about, because it definitely wasn't just jealousy. Zhenhuan also wonders, but they will just have to wait and see. When Zhenhuan goes to the emperor's hall, she overhears First Prince being berated for not being good in his studies. He comes out embarrassed. Zhenhuan feels sorry for him. "I looked at Yu Li. He was already a boy of 16 or 17. Having been raised directly by the empress, he was taught to be very polite in his words and actions. There was nothing vulgar in his appearance. He wore a magnificent ink-black robe lined with the white fur of an Arctic fox that only added to his aristocratic air. But having been so severely restrained since he was a child, he retained an air of reservedness. There was no sparkle in his eye. He studies all day and night and still can't live up to his parents' expectations. Unlike in the drama, he's a sweet, normal teenage boy. There's none of that stepmama drama." Since he has the opportunity to speak to her in private, he thanks Zhenhuan for the compassion she showed in speaking up for his mom and fighting for her to be buried with dignity despite her crime. He leaves, and Zhenhuan sighs as she thinks about the constrained life he's been living for the last decade. It comes time to choose a wife for the first prince, and to add to the joy, the emperor decides to make it a joint event where he will be choosing some concubines as well. Zhenhuan is put in charge. Hu makes a rare visit to Zhenhuan's palace to present a young girl to her, Xu Yiren, an adopted daughter of a semi-prominent family. Hu says she finds she gets along really well with this young girl and would just love it if she could be included in the concubine selection, just so they could be sister-wife BFFs and see each other more often. There is no scheming going on here at all. Practically rolling her eyes, Zhenhuan agrees and Hu skips off. Yu Rao handed me a cup of tea, rested her chin in her hands and said, "The selection hasn't even started yet, and she's already rushing to recruit her own people into the palace." A few days later, Zhenhuan is invited to tea and flower watching, and also to take part in the Empress's The Bachelor spinoff for her son. She arrives to find the Empress trying hard to get her son and a relative of hers to get along, but she doesn't like children and he doesn't like her. Wanting a break from the awkward scene, Zhenhuan goes for a walk and runs into Hu's friend, Xu Yiren, practicing a dance. A figure comes up from behind, picks up a hair ornament she dropped while dancing, and hands it to her. It's First Prince, and it is love at first sight. It isn't long until he's seeking Zhenhuan out for some stepmotherly advice about the upcoming draft. Yu Li raised his eyebrows and said, "Shu Fei, you're always considerate. I know you would never ridicule me." He thought for a moment. "My father is the emperor. Naturally, the focus of this draft will be choosing candidates to add to his harem." I couldn't help but smile inwardly as I raised my eyes to look at the glittering peach blossoms that filled the air. "The focus of this draft is to select a concubine for you, Your Highness. As for filling the harem, those candidates will be considered once you've made your preferences known. Thus, your highness will have your hands full on that day. Be discerning in your own choices, but also be mindful of the emperor and the empress's subtle cues before deciding which young lady to hand your scepter to. Yuli looked timid. I know that I'm foolish. I'll no doubt make a mistake. What if royal father is not pleased with... An anxious look gradually filled his eyes as if he was very uneasy. Zhenhuan gives him some advice. You are no longer a child. Your mother can make arrangements for you, but not decisions. If you happen to have someone in mind already, why not first meet with your father and let him know? This can also be seen as a show of your filial piety. The more Yuli listened, the more relaxed his expression became. By the end, his eyebrows were almost flying off his face, he was so full of smiles. Thank you, Shu Fei, for your advice. Galvanized, First Prince goes to see the Emperor, and the Emperor goes to see Zhenhuan right away. He says his son came to tell him that he fell in love with a beautiful girl named Xu Yiren and wants to marry her. He looked into her and found out about her connection to Hu. Zhenhuan confirms but says that Hu really intended the girl to be selected by the Emperor. He made a soft sound and said calmly, Yunrong sure is caring. He looked a bit angry. Since Yurong prepared this person for me, why did Yuli become taken with her? Does this child really not know better? I handed him an orange slice and whispered softly, Yunrong has only brought this up to me. Even your majesty didn't know, how could the first prince? At most, it's merely a coincidence. I pursed my lips and smiled. It must have been difficult for the first prince to go and tell you this. It seems that this Xu Yiren has indeed touched his heart. Xuanling said thoughtfully, that is true. This child has always been so timid in front of me. It's rare for him to be so daring. The Emperor is not at all happy to realize that Hu is trying to get women into his bed, but is really happy to see this girl is making his son a little braver, so he says he will have a look at the girl during the draft, and if she's fitting, then of course he won't stand in the way of his son's happiness. The day arrives. The Emperors Zhenhuan, Duan, and Jing are all there, as are of course the Emperor and the First Prince. When it's finally Xu Yiren's turn, she's right next to the Empress's niece. After a quick little poetry test, the Emperor is very happy with Yiren and decides she will be chosen as First Prince's wife. But the Empress is not happy. She nervously asks if her status is not too low, to which the Emperor responds dismissively that it's perfectly fine. She then asks if First Prince should not be allowed to choose his own wife, to which Jing responds the final decision is still up to his parents, so why bother? The Empress, still not giving up and showing an uncharacteristic amount of pushback in front of the Emperor, says more insistently that she really thinks First Prince should be allowed to make his own decision. First Prince is called forward. The Empress tells him to think very carefully about his decision as he's given the scepter to hand to his future wife. Yuli hesitated for a moment, then, without thinking any further, walked towards Xu Yiren. The Empress's expression suddenly changed and she shouted out, Leer! Yuli suddenly turned around, that unsure expression darkening his brow again like clouds forming in the sky. He hesitated and then said respectfully, What are your instructions, Royal Mother? The Empress smiled kindly and said, What instructions could Mother have for you? I only want to remind you of the importance of the scepter. Be sure to hold on to it carefully. Yuli's silence spread through the hall like stagnant water. The look of helplessness in his eyes gradually deepened, and he said softly, Yes. My heart is absolutely breaking, this poor baby. Zhenhuan watches the fight leave his eyes as he turns around again to the Empress's niece. Yuli suddenly took a deep breath. His movements slowed, and the scepter passed by Xi Wei and came to rest in front of Yiren. The Empress's expression darkened and she was about to speak, but it was too late. Yiren's hands firmly grasped the scepter and she knelt down with her hands held up flat. Her smile was like a delicate rose blooming between her flushed cheeks. Thank you, my lord, for your grace. Thank you to the Emperor and Empress for your grace. Ah, he did it! I'm so happy for him! The Empress now has to slap on a smile and pretend she's very happy with the choice, and the Emperor, actually happy, says they will be married next month. So, not how I was expecting this to go. In all honesty, I thought Xuanling was going to take one look at Yiren and fall in love for some reason, snatching her right out from under his son. Or, worse yet, do it on purpose as some kind of power play. But no! First Prince bravely chose the person he really wanted to be with, making his own decision for once. I feel tricked in the best way. The Emperor does end up choosing 6 new girls, 2 of them prepared by the Empress. They are Qiong Guiren and Jiang Meiren. As for the other 4, I promise you they are of no importance. 3 of them don't even have names. Hu pouts for a few days but is ultimately powerless watching her prized apple go to the First Prince. And these 2, well, have about as much chance at happiness as any other young couple. The Emperor and Zhenhuan are hanging out one day and they spot Yingpin, the girl Zhenhuan caught crying earlier, on a boat. They call her to shore and she looks very unwell. The Emperor has a doctor take her pulse. She tries to resist at first, insisting she's fine, but the Emperor is adamant, which is how we find out that she is 2 months pregnant. From Zhenhuan's observation, she seems both overjoyed and very confused. She's sent home to rest up. As Zhenhuan keeps her eye on Yang, she can't help but find her to be a bit of a weirdo. She just always seems to be looking around and distracted, and her reactions always seem a bit off. Zhenhuan runs into Xuanqing and Jingxian, same scene as the drama. As Jingxian regains her health, HuanBi seems more and more to be getting put on the back burner, and even Lanyi notices, seeking Zhenhuan out to tell her not to underestimate a woman's jealousy. Why did His Majesty marry Zhen Yuyin? You know better than I. How could that paper cutout have fallen out so easily for no reason? His Majesty is not such a careless person. I secretly praised her intelligence and sharpness. I said with a sigh, what's done is done. You, of all people, should understand that it is better to be in control of your own fate. It's just that you and I didn't have such an opportunity. Her intentions were selfish, but understandable. HuanBi comes by to complain about Jingxian. Jingxian is still physically weak, so HuanBi usually takes care of the day-to-day stuff, but it actually makes her look like the lesser one, like she's doing the grunt work while the real princess of the house sits in the back being fanned and fawned over. Angrily, HuanBi gets to what's really got her avoiding home. Jingxian is somehow, suddenly, 2 months pregnant. Zhenhuan is of course hurt to hear that Xuanqing slept with Jingxian, but still tries to calm down and comfort the seething and crying HuanBi. And then, Yuyin's crying subsided. She stood up slowly, her expression returning to its normal calm state in an instant.
Acting.
Yeah, so HuanBi was lying, Jingxian's not pregnant. Suddenly calm, HuanBi points out that the expression on Zhenhuan's face just now was not just worry for HuanBi, she still clearly has not let Xuanqing go. The waves of shock in my heart were slowly frozen by the cold. I had never expected that my own blood sister would test me like this. Though my heart was as cold as ice, I tried my best to put on a calm smile. Why bother putting on such a show? I understand your meaning. I paused and said, His Majesty is your husband, my brother-in-law. It's as HuanBi is begging Zhenhuan to finally let Xuanqing go that Jingxian arrives. HuanBi hides, and surprise, surprise, Jingxian reveals that she actually is pregnant. HuanBi has that startled reaction, so clearly she really was lying earlier, it's just that the story she made up as a test actually came true. Jingxian asks after HuanBi, saying she actually came to apologize to her. She says she's always been accused of stealing HuanBi's thunder by getting married to Xuanqing, and whoops, now she's gone and done it again by being the first one pregnant. Since HuanBi is not here though, she does have a question for Zhenhuan. Since she married Xuanqing, she's been trying really hard to win his heart. She knew this would be difficult, what with all the stories of Xuanqing and HuanBi's legendary love, but what has her confused is, why does it seem like HuanBi is also struggling to win his love? She looked hesitant for a moment, then her expression settled. I suspect that Yuyin's marriage was actually a carefully orchestrated plan. Perhaps it was Yuyin herself who wanted to go from a sparrow to a phoenix, so she came up with a way to marry the prince. But if that were the case, the prince would only have to ignore her. Why would he go to such lengths to give her such a dignified position? Which makes me think that the prince is using Yuyin to show his respect for another person. And the reason he accepted this marriage in the first place was that paper cutout. Jingxian is sharp. Zhenhuan can see that she's watching her carefully and hoping she'll spill something, so she tries to control her expression. She says from her years in the palace, she's learned that these kinds of suspicious thoughts can only lead to headache. Jingxian says she's right, and after all, if any of her crazy suspicions were right, it would lead to the death of her beloved husband. So of course, there's no need to dig too deep. But it's very clearly, I know, and you know I know, and I know you know I know. Zhenhuan watches her leave in a cold sweat and thinks that if she and Lanyi put it together so easily, who knows what everyone else is thinking. HuanBi comes out from behind the curtain and says Jingxian cannot be allowed to live. Zhenhuan has to remind her that Jingxian loves Xuanqing too and would not reveal a secret that could hurt him. There was a cold, murderous look in Yuyin's eyes, contrasting with her unassuming face. Yo Jingxian is far too clever, and a woman's heart is easily turned to jealousy. I would not be so sure. Zhenhuan is absolutely not having it, but HuanBi starts talking about how she can think of methods that don't require weapons. I was so anxious that I couldn't restrain myself or measure my words. If you really do something to hurt this child, don't blame me for disregarding our sisterhood. Have you forgotten how you became Prince Qinghe's consort? Yuyin, startled, looked straight at me and asked, how I became the prince's consort? The pupils in her eyes shrank fiercely, then she smiled and said, Of course, this marriage was a fated gift from heaven, achieved with the wholehearted support of my older sister. I looked at her rich attire, all gold and jade, and sighed softly. Yuyin, you achieved this by yourself. How could that little portrait have fallen out so coincidentally? Her eyelashes trembled violently, hanging down like feathers, protecting her from my sharp gaze. Are you joking, sister? Zhenhuan tells her she's always known, and she never blamed her for doing what she could to be with the man of her dreams. But in no uncertain terms, if she raises a hand against Jingshan, she will tell Xuanqing the truth. HuanBi settles down and agrees, lamenting that she probably cursed herself by putting on that show earlier. Now it's come true. Noble Lady Cheng, one of the ones recommended by the Empress, becomes very favored. Lots of the other women send her gifts, but not only is she not accepting them, she won't accept any visitors, so of course no one likes her. One night she comes to visit Zhenhuan, and we don't see what was said, which, like, girl, again, this is first person, stop having Zhenhuan keep secrets from herself. Anyway, the next morning the Empress hosts a morning meeting and Cheng is not there. Zhenhuan says Cheng reported to her that she's been feeling unwell, and another consort says it's weird that she was well enough to visit Zhenhuan but not the Empress. The Empress, miffed, tells a servant to go and get her. The servant comes back in a rush to report that Cheng is missing. Not just that, her things are gone, and it doesn't even look like she slept in her bed last night. The concubines looked at each other in shock, and the Empress was incredibly angry. She landed a heavy palm on the railing of her carved wooden chair. Nonsense! If she lives, we should see her. If she's died, then her corpse. How can a woman of the great Zhou dynasty simply disappear? Zhenhuan was the last person to see her. As everyone is scrambling to put things together, Zhen's old maid, Shishao, suddenly pipes up that Cheng is a distant relative of Dr. Wei's, Zhenhuan's trusted doctor. With a smile that was not really a smile, I said, Imperial Concubine Rong is well informed. Even I was unaware of the relationship. It seems that Imperial Concubine Rong is quite close to Noble Lady Cheng for her to have shared this with you. Imperial Concubine Rong sneered. No matter how close we are, it cannot be compared to her nighttime visit with you, Shu Fei. Hu is also very vocal about Zhenhuan's apparent closeness with the reclusive Cheng. Zhenhuan insists that all Cheng did was ask her to pass on the message that she was unwell. The Empress says she has no choice but to report this to the Emperor. Investigation is left to the Empress since Zhenhuan is involved, and sometime later it all comes to a head. They all meet up, and Li Cheng reports that a cousin of Cheng's has also gone missing. Apparently, they were having an affair and ran off together. Zhenhuan glances over at the Emperor, who is looking very suspicious of her. According to the Empress, all evidence points to Zhenhuan having quietly snuck Cheng out of the palace in a water barrel, using the power her name commands to make sure that no one would inspect the barrels. And the Empress is so disappointed in Zhenhuan. She can ignore petty squabbles here and there, but how could Zhenhuan have sunk so low? For shame! The Emperor asks her to explain exactly what they discussed that night, and Zhenhuan still insists all Cheng did was ask her to pass along her sick note. Just then, a servant comes to report that the bodies of Cheng and the man she ran away with were found in the mountains miles away from the capital, stabbed and robbed of their money. Rong wonders if it was really bandits or was someone trying to silence them. Zhenhuan realizes she's been well and truly got. There's nothing she can say except simply that she didn't do it. The Emperor tells her to step down for a while they figure this out. Zhenhuan's palace becomes a cold palace, but the Empress is just so impatient to get rid of her that in no time there's another plot where her second selection, Jiang Xiaoyuan, becomes pregnant, miscarries, and the blame again seems to fall on Zhenhuan. But then, Zhenhuan is saved by a surprise pregnancy, because you know how the Emperor is. Oh my gosh, you're pregnant? Well, forget all my suspicions then. Knowing she's safe, for now at least, Zhenhuan goes to see the Empress, consoling her for losing her two handpicked girls in such short succession. The Empress congratulates her on so easily dodging both attacks. Okay, so I guess we know where we both stand. Zhenhuan goes to leave. After walking only a few steps, I suddenly heard a deep voice behind me say, Wan. The voice was extremely cold and venomous, as if those two words were filled with a lifetime's resentment. Though it was a summer night, the cold tone still made me shiver. I knew the one she called out for was not really me, but I couldn't help but pause. The Empress's smile was like a sword's edge, sharp enough to kill. She said, one word at a time, After all these years, do you still think it is you he is calling when he says Wan? Zhenhuan calmly tells her that she can no longer use this to hurt her. She's already made her peace with it. There will only ever be one person in Xuanling's heart. What Empress? What mother of the world? All the women in the harem are fighting with their schemes, their time, even their lives. Not one of us is the exception. Do you think any one of us can win? No. Every single one of us will only ever lose. We have not the slimmest chance of winning. We fight as if it is all on the line, but we can only fight the living, not the dead. We will never be able to defeat the deceased Chunyuan. The one and only adversary in this harem has always, only ever been Chunyuan. The Empress loses her strength and tells Zhenhuan to go. So there are now two pregnancies in the harem, Zhenhuan and Ying. The pregnant Ying is promoted to Jiang Wanyi, but we have another Jiang, so I'll just keep calling her Ying. Zhenhuan goes to see Ying in her new palace, and again, she's crying. Zhenhuan says she must be having a hard time. Clearly, guard Lu Li has not been doing his job. Ying is startled and says she has no idea who Zhenhuan is talking about. Seeing there were no outsiders around, I let my smile slip. A few days ago, I happened to hear Imperial concubine Shun say that ever since you became pregnant, one of the guards has been especially diligent, that he's often seen patrolling outside of your palace. Imperial concubine Shun was quite envious, thinking it was the emperor who had especially instructed him to do so. It is fortunate for you that she did not go to the emperor with those thoughts, or the emperor himself would have grown suspicious. After all, he never gave such an order. Ying is badly shaken and says she had no idea. Zhenhuan says they've both been rather obvious. She tells Ying that everything is fine, she should just take care of herself and safely give birth to the child. As for the guard, she'll take care of him. Your Highness! She grabbed my clothes tightly, unable to hold her tears back. I beg you, do not kill Luli, no! I can control my eyes, I can control my mouth, Your Highness. Rest assured, only please do not kill him. I know my mistake. Ying explains that they had been in love when they lived together in the 9th Prince's manor, but then he was sent in as a guard and she was sent into the selection. They recognized each other, reuniting here at the palace, but kept their distance. Until one night, she slipped and fell in the snow on her way to see the emperor. He was patrolling and found her with a twisted ankle. Her servants were sent to send the message to the emperor, and since she couldn't walk, he carried her home, and well, one thing led to another. She promises it was only the one time, and this baby might even be the emperor's. Zhenhuan can't help but think of Mei Zhuang, and of course she's also cheated on the emperor. She feels pity, but she can't help but think that if this child comes out looking like guard number 389, that's her implicated, as well as the 9th Prince and Yu Rao. She hardens herself and hands Ying some abortion meds. I said solemnly, "Take this and your problems will cease." I paused and said, "As for children, there will always be more in the future." Ying starts crying, begging her not to make her drink it, but Zhenhuan will not waver, asking if she intends to implicate everyone around her for this unborn child. She promises that she will not kill the guard as long as she does as she's told. Ying thinks for a moment. Gathering her strength, she brings the medicine to her mouth, but then, at the last minute, throws it to the floor. Qin Shui held back her tears, her expression resolute. "Shu Fei, I will never see Luli again, and I will never again be so weak as to cry and rouse other people's suspicions. I will live well, so please, let me give birth to this child. Whether it's the emperor's child or Luli's child, I cannot lose him." Now to me, this still doesn't solve the problem of the baby not looking like its legal father, but for whatever reason, Zhenhuan is convinced. She promises to keep her secret as long as she keeps her promise. She tells Jinxi to transfer Luli as far away from Ying as possible. 5 months later, Jiang Qinshui gave birth to a baby girl who was given the title the Warm-Hearted Princess. She was Xuanling's 5th daughter. At that time, the sky was filled with snow, and she cried with joy as she held her young daughter in her arms. Meanwhile, Lu Li stood guard hundreds of miles away at Guanlin Palace. They never saw each other again. Back to the harem. We get the Empress kill Empress scene, with the only change being that Zhenhuan didn't hear it herself. She says her brother mentioned it to her after having heard it from Lingrong. Jinhuan's pregnancy sucks. She asks Dr. Wen back to check on her fetus, and he says it won't come to term. We have the choral meetup, the Empress is forced to come. Zhenhuan whispers to the Empress that she's feeling unwell, so the Empress walks her inside. When they get inside, Zhenhuan won't let go of her hand and keeps saying her stomach hurts. She slips, punches herself in the stomach, and then passes out. She wakes up, "Where's my baby? It was you! I would never!" Long Yue says it was the Empress, and she's put under house arrest. Then that big banquet from episode 71. Jingshen tries Third Prince's food, it was poisoned. She's sent out while they investigate, and it's reported that Rong asked to take a peek at the food before it was served. The Emperor calls her up and she has a weird reaction, coming up to him and raising her wine cup, asking if he'll accept one last drink from her before she explains. Xuanling looked at her charming expression with cold eyes and did not say a word. Imperial concubine Rong held the cup aloft for a long time, her expression gradually stiffening before morphing into a mask of helplessness and despair. Finally, she withdrew her long outstretched hands. She passed her slender fingers over the rim of the cup. Her fingers trembled as she brought the cup to her lips. Lan Yi catches on that she's trying to poison herself, and Xuanqing slaps the cup out of her hand. Xuanqing is brittling with anger and asks why she would do such a thing when she's been so pampered. Reveal, reveal. Chishao, who it was previously mentioned bared a certain resemblance, is actually Hua Fei's little sister. When Hua's family imploded, all the adult females were sold off as prostitutes. Her little sister was still young enough that that was not her fate, and she was instead lucky enough to be sold into slavery. She faked her identity and worked her way into the palace, all the while planning her revenge. Zhenhuan almost pities her. She's clearly believed all these years that her family's fall was the fault of the Zhen family, and being as young as she was when Huan died and seeing all her family killed and sold off, I mean, it's hard not to feel for her. Chishao screams angrily, trying so hard to claw her way over to Zhenhuan that she snaps her fingernails off. She screams that Zhenhuan will face retribution one day as the emperor sentences her to death. Meanwhile, in the other room, Jingshan gives birth to a prince, but unlike in the drama, she's okay. She needs her rest, but she will recover. They take the baby out of the room to give her some peace and quiet. HuanBi is clearly jealous of the new baby, and rather than watch them fawn over him, volunteers to instead take soup to Jingshan. Everyone is cooing over the new baby, and when HuanBi returns, she chastises Shenqing for the way he's holding him, practically an expert with all the babies she's helped Zhenhuan raise. It's a very warm family scene with the baby immediately taking to HuanBi and everyone giving congratulations. And then, the doctor comes out in a panic to report that Jingshan has died. I'm guessing you can guess what happened here. And it's crazy because when I first did recaps for this drama, I remember saying something like HuanBi should be suspect number 1. If this had actually been a poisoning attempt on Jingshan's life, my prime suspect would definitely have been HuanBi. So Jingshan was going to recover and HuanBi went and literally killed her, getting her husband and baby all to herself. And sadder still, Jingshan died alone in that other room instead of getting to spend her final moments with the man she loved. It's just dreadful. Can you imagine this being the last thing you see? The baby is named Yucha. The only one unaffected is HuanBi, who very happily brings baby Yucha to see Zhenhuan at a later date. Zhenhuan is a bit surprised at how well HuanBi is taking all of this, asking if it doesn't make her afraid, knowing that Jingshan's blood flows through him. Afraid? Afraid of what? Yuyin was startled for only a moment before recovering her faint smile. In the future, his heart will only have me as his mother. I will love and care for him, and he will be filial to me. What exactly do I have to fear? After saying this, she placed a doting kiss on the child's forehead, by all appearances, a loving mother. Zhenhuan sits in silence for a while and then says deliberately that that tiny sip of poison porridge Jingshan had should not have been enough to cause her death. HuanBi's expression doesn't change as she says, "These things happen, and everyone knows this was the fault of Chisha." Seeing that she won't confess, Zhenhuan pulls out Chisha's broken fingernails. Of the 4 that came off, they only found 3. I stared at Yuyin and said coldly, "Tell me, where did the nail containing the poison powder go?" Yuyin's expression changed drastically. She stood up and suddenly shouted, "Sister, you've gone crazy!" "The crazy one is not me, but you." I stared at her beautiful face. It was hard to believe that there was such a vicious and cold heart hidden under that gentle face. Killing the mother to seize the son. You sure did handle everything cleanly. Not a single person would suspect that you were the culprit. HuanBi goes on a very long, very unhinged rant, so I'm just gonna give you the highlights. Sister, all of this was initially meant to be mine. It was Yo Jingshan who took what was mine. I was only returning things to their rightful order. I waited for so many years. Of course I knew you were the only one in His Majesty's heart, but I could bear that. The only thing I hoped for was that it would just be the 2 of us in his manor. Who would have thought that before I could marry him, Yo Jingshan would appear from nowhere? The smell of another woman in the place where the prince and I shared our lives together, the thought of another woman looking at him with those affectionate eyes, it made me want to be sick. How could I endure the thought of her and this baby getting all the love from the prince in the future, completely destroying everything I worked so hard for? I always knew you were dissatisfied with me marrying the prince. You hate me for stealing the one you love. This is such a great opportunity, sister. You'd best not miss it. Her voice was so shrill that the child in her arms was startled awake and he burst into tears. Yuyin's body trembled and she hurriedly hugged the child, coaxing him with soft sounds as a tear fell from her eye. And those were just the highlights. HuanBi went off. And you know, it's funny. In a way, Jingshan, HuanBi, and Zhenhuan all ended up living in the shadow of the woman their husband really wants to be with. All the princes in this family fall hard one time and just never want to be with anyone else ever again. Must be genetic. Zhenhuan says maybe the more fitting punishment would be to tell Shenqing, but HuanBi responds that that would only break his heart. He's already racked with guilt about Jingshan dying, giving birth to his baby, and if he found out that this was thanks to his other wife scheming right under his nose, he would never forgive himself. Emotional blackmail, baby. Zhenhuan watches her coddle the baby and just doesn't know what to do. She starts to reminisce on the HuanBi she grew up with and thinks about how she didn't grow up with any parental guidance or love. She wonders if she can really destroy her sister with her own hands. Zhenhuan asks HuanBi if she will really treat this child as her own. Why wouldn't I? She looked up with tears in her eyes and said, I probably won't have a child of my own in this life. Chur will be my only child. He will only know me as his mother. Our family of 3 will live a happy life. She looked at me with deep, tranquil eyes. You'll keep the secret, won't you? Countless thoughts roll through her head, but in the end, she decides to do as HuanBi says. And hopefully that was the right choice. Till next time, thanks for watching.